so far because I just have to say it. I loved hearing what Jack was saying about Star Trek. I'm one of those who grew up with Star Trek, and that's why I got involved in space in the first place. But there's one big piece missing from our current space sector that is pretty fundamental in Star Trek: the Prime Directive. There needs to be some work on that, I think. Thanks for bringing that up, Jack. So, good afternoon, fellows of the RSA, and also friends and those interested in space and those working in it. It's really good to see you here. And as a former space sector CSO, director, etc., I'm now thankfully semi-retired. It was supposed to be retired, but that's about a month. So I don't have to worry too much about things anymore. What you were saying, Sarah, about those who don't have to worry about what they say. Yeah, I'm in that privileged position, which is really good. I now just mentor the Ascend mission, which we mentioned there, which I think is fantastic. So I'm one of the mentors for that. And I write, and I'm a sustainability advisor. I'm quite happy doing that and not having the stress of the executive life anymore. Now, I'm also proud to be a co-founding fellow of this RSA Space Network. And for that reason, I'm very pleased to see it so well attended. SpaceCon's been fabulous, but absolutely exhausting. And it's great that this room is still full at the end of it. So I really appreciate everybody being here for that. And this was the brainchild of our esteemed network chair and brilliant fellow of the RSA himself, Sylvia Paver, who you've been hearing all the way through. Sylvia's quite a modest chap, so he hasn't pointed out the fact that he organised this almost single-handedly, and if you don't mind, I'd like to thank him with a little round of applause. Now, my generous publishers have released this small guidebook today. It's called To Sustainability and Beyond. It's a practical guide to environmental responsibility in the space sector. When Sylvia persuaded me to launch this event, an event called Space Unites, I did think that we would be spending the entire afternoon talking about exciting space mysteries, cosmology, and all the stuff that Jack was talking about, really. And I'm sure there's still time for that, but I do actually have the antidote. I've written a book which is about licensing conditions, life cycle accountability, and ESG compliance and frameworks. So that should stop you all peeking over too early. Now, I know it doesn't sound thrilling, all of that stuff, but I must say that compliance and governance does still have its place in space. This book kind of started with a very simple observation. And that observation was, it was just the fact that space is infrastructure. And satellites have long been underpinning a wide range of our systems that we use in everyday life. I'll just try and get that to change. Hopefully it'll stay this time. Yeah, so a lot of what underpins what we do every day is done by satellite. Position, navigation and timing, PNC, climate monitoring, forecasting, insurance and finance, forestry and biodiversity protection, urban planning, disaster prediction and response, national security, your wearable devices and your mobile, and anything else that you're connected with at the moment. I don't know what the latest thing is that anybody's got attached to them, but that's also connected to satellite. And wildlife conservation as well, and much more. In fact, one of my favourite things I did in many years at the BBC was reporting on counting the population of walrus via satellite, which was a lot of fun. And most of the conservation projects I now do are absolutely reliant on satellite data and Earth observation. And experts like Sylvia and Cesar at Optimal Cities are actually as vital to the team as the ecologists, and we rely on them for that. Now, when infrastructure becomes essential, and expands at the speed of the new space economy, which is rather alarming, if anything, nothing else. Sustainability cannot sit outside it as a bolt-on. But we often boil down the conversations to a very simple thing. We just talk about orbital debris, generally. I could say 9 times out of 10, when somebody says they want to have a conversation with me about space sustainability, they mean orbital debris. Now that really matters, of course it matters. It was said earlier that if we mess up Leo, we'll just send it up to Neo. Also, we've got to talk about the wider responsibility, because it is the entire life cycle of space systems that we need to look at. So that's design, financing, materials and supply chains, and the dreaded scope 3. Manufacturing, testing, launch, ground infrastructure, operations, and end-of-life decisions. Now, new guidance was discussed this morning and possibly yesterday morning at Spacecom. I'm losing track now, it's been so long, we're getting loaded. But yes, it was discussed and reinforced, which I think is exactly what was needed. So, CIA has now got a companion to CAP 2215 for AEEs, which is assessments of environmental effects. So you will no doubt come across it if you're working in the sector. You need to measure your AEEs. If you want to get a license for a spaceport or a launch, to get that license you do need to be measuring your AEEs. Or you won't get it. And that's actually in the Space Industry Act of 2018. So it's been around a while. And I think that conversation this morning and the really good guidelines that were added to what already existed with CAP 2215 gives us all the tools that we need really now to be able to do that properly. Now, that's not great for consultants like myself, sustainability consultants who make a living out of telling people how to do this kind of thing. But I've also worked in a lot of startups who can't afford consultants. They can't afford that kind of advice. And I think that it's been laid out really well by the UK Civil Aviation Authority and the team behind that. So, you mentioned wood earlier, Japan. So, I should say something about that. So part of the guide actually looks at practical areas where environmental alternatives could improve things for responsible people. So alternative launch fuels, lower sulfur methane systems, hydrogen-based propulsion research, hybrid launch approaches, and material choices, all very important. A lot more resources could be put into that. Going back to what you said, ESA has actually put a lot of time and effort into researching bio-based composites. And there are many parties now trying that out, and of course, that goes back to your wooden satellites. It's a really good idea, and we need to take it seriously, along with other bio-based composites, and make that happen. So using recycled aerospace-grade aluminium, for example, can reduce emissions by 95%. But it does come with its own impacts as well, because anytime you use a different material, you have a different process, and you have to assess it again, because it comes with a whole different set of impacts. One of my favourite writers is Octavia E. Butler. I don't know if you've read any of her work. She's a legend, and in one of her books, I think it was Parable of the Sower, she says, whatever you touch, you change, and whatever you change, changes you. And we really do need to think about what we're doing in that sense when it comes to space. None of these impact solutions, none of these ideas are silver bullets, but they illustrate something important, and that is that responsibility often boils down to the small incremental choices that are made across the systems by just members of the team who care and are in the right responsible mindset. It's lots of little things. And now, despite the best efforts of my publisher's arts team to design a cover that looks very exciting, I'm sorry to tell you that it's really not. And I did try and tell them this and say, it looks too exciting. You're overselling. It's definitely not. A large proportion of the book is not narrative prose at all, in any way. In fact, it is actually a big proportion of it, at least a third, is just a structured, boiled down self-assessment process that you can use. So it has all the right questions, places to put your answers, and gives you a head start, especially if you're a new entrepreneur entering this realm. It can save you a lot of mistakes right at the beginning. So It's mainly a self-assessment framework. It's got operational impact in there, life cycle accountability, governance structure, risk awareness, environmental decision making, everything that you need. That's because sustainability, sadly, is not achieved through the many green and pleasant marketing statements that get made by a lot of companies. It's actually made through process and often uncelebrated work of our teammates and colleagues just doing the right thing because they happen to care about that stuff, not because they're actually being paid. And that brings me back to the theme of this event. Space does unite us, and that's because space forces us to look at Earth differently. As relatively small, finite, interdependent, and governed by consequence. If space infrastructure is sustainability based, it has to be from the very beginning. The advice that people should be getting from their mentors is right from the start of the first things that you're doing. You should be looking at this, and you should be thinking, how is my product different? What impacts do we actually have? And just design from the beginning. The organisations who have the biggest problem with this are the ones who have been doing so long and are so far down the line that it's very expensive and difficult to change things. So startups have the advantage here. I have actually finished the book with a little change to the phrase that we hear in this sector all the time, and that's this, ad astra. So I've added a bit. Ad astra responsibility. To the stars, responsibly. And I've also, because you've all supported an RSA event, and I am one of the fellowship counsellors for the RSA, I've stuck a QR code on there. You can have the book for free. Scan that, you get the e-book, and I spoke to the publishers this morning, and they said, feel free to share it with people who make a difference. That's you.